up there? My name is Gretch, and I am the one who primarily runs the Never Tox page. And I'm doing an IGTV today, a little bit different. I'm actually recording on my computer screen on my iMac. So this is kind of interesting because I have my notes like right in front of me. But I wanted to do an IGTV today to address the circus stunt live video that was the fashion blogger and her Botox manufacturer trainer that yes, I got kicked out of for making statements in the comments. They didn't like them, they kicked me out, but obviously since then I've been able to watch the replay. And so I'm going to focus my IGTV on correcting the loads of misinformation that were presented by the injector or trainer, whatever you want to refer to her as, because she does both. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, so right out of the gate, we have the injector making absolute statements. Now, absolute statements are statements that are said to be 100% one way or another, and they are not relative or comparative. And as a medical professional, you have a responsibility to be extra careful not to make such statements because in medicine, there are always cases and exceptions to the rule. It would be much more appropriate to say, I believe, or I think, or studies show, something along those lines. And obviously I know that people aren't perfect. I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. And it's a very easy mistake to make. We've all done it. But I want to say that being a medical professional, I believe, holds you to a much higher standard because you are influencing the decisions of thousands of people. And in this case, that live video, the last I checked, was viewed over like 100,000, gosh, that sounds really high, but 100,000 times. And so these absolute statements are going out to the masses. And for me, because there's always exceptions to that rule, making those statements just really reduces the credibility of the person making them in my eyes. Okay, so moving on. She says at the very beginning that neurotoxins aren't permanent. And I'll let her have that statement only if she is talking about ptosis and specifically ptosis, which yes, that is typically true. Ptosis is a temporary condition, and once muscle is restored, once movement is restored to the muscle after a period of time, whether it be weeks, months, or even longer, the ptosis will correct itself. However, as an exception to the rule, if it correcting itself, in our larger group, the group on Facebook that has over 10,000 people in it now, we do have a couple users that have ptosis from Botox, and their ptosis has carried on for a year or more. And one gal actually sought corrective surgical treatment to fix that. And so we can't say, whether or not it would have been permanent or not, since she ended up correcting it the best that she could. So we don't know. But fortunately, yes, in most cases, ptosis corrects itself with no treatment. Once new nerves grow in that are then again able to release acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter that communicates at the neuromuscular junction to tell those muscles to contract. It is important to mention that when a user experiences ptosis, that this is a very clear indicator that the toxin has spread past the intended area and that the user is at risk of acquiring iatrogenic botulism or further symptoms of iatrogenic botulism poisoning. And this is outlined very clearly in the product's warning label. And this is why it is especially important not to apply heat, massage, vibrations, or any microcurrents to the area, because that shortly after you receive those injections, because that can actually cause the toxin to migrate further. And so having toxin move into the bloodstream or any other intended areas oftentimes make people seriously ill. And we have loads of people in our group that this has specifically happened to, where they become very ill weeks or months after they have those injections from doing those practices. Okay, so then the injector goes on to say that she is curious what people's permanent side effects are from Botox injections, and this is her referring to, I believe it was the fashion blogger who said, people are saying that this is permanent. I believe she was talking about ptosis, and she goes and makes another absolute statement that wouldn't be related to neurotoxin, that's for sure. So today I'm going to present you with some information specifically that presents some of the longer term side effects of Botox use that affect users for 2 years oftentimes or more, and this leads the user to believe that their damage from the neurotoxin use is in fact permanent. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Also, I'm going to give people more specific information in this video that I think that they were wanting to see in that live video that they just simply weren't given, because it became very apparent, like just right away, that the manufacturer's rep's intention for that live video was absolutely to keep a positive opinion on tox injections. She didn't share anything from the warning label at all. She is quite knowledgeable in the art of explaining away ptosis due to placement, technique, and dilution, as this can happen to any injector, as well as knowing all of the names of the muscles in the face and also having a magic touch to be able to feel with her fingers the strength of people's muscles, which navigates her where to actually do the tox injections. And so for me, this was just a great effort to explain away why the ptosis had happened, and to help prevent it from happening to others. And I know there was a lot of injectors that were watching that video, but her explanation completely failed to explain the warning label of the product itself, which talks about unintentional neurotoxin spread, how it can happen just because of what it is, all by itself, just because it is a very large neurotoxic protein that has the ability to migrate even with proper placement, even with correct techniques, even with perfect dilution. It can still happen just simply because of what it is. So I'm going to read to you from a study, actually, that talks about that. And I will list all the study names that I use for this live video. I guess it will be in the comments of the Instagram. And then I will probably also do a blog post on this. But pharmacovigilance data and case reports imply that botulinum toxin may be associated with severe adverse events such as botulism, generalized paralysis, dysphagia, respiratory depression, and even death. These adverse events are attributed either to the mode of action of botulinum toxin, the mode being the muscle paralysis of the wrong muscle, okay, or to the chemical structure of the protein itself. So it says right there in this study that it can be just the protein itself. Serious adverse events may be dose-dependent and attributed to local diffusion of botulinum toxin to adjacent areas, and indeed, diffusion of botulinum toxin in the injected muscle and adjacent muscles has also been well documented. Then it goes on to talk about diffusion of botulinum toxin, and then importantly, the animal studies. Animal studies, we can see, even the millimeters about how far this toxin actually has the ability to move. And then they also show what's called generalized diffusion of botulinum toxin. And this is possible, especially after long-term therapeutic or cosmetic use. And generalized just means that it can be like in any area. It can move distantly, okay, to other areas, or it can move to one side, those kinds of things. Okay, so that is a really good study that talks about systemic toxin spread and how it leads to adverse events of botulism. It talks about the mechanisms responsible for this and how it's just really not known how it happens. So that's really important to know. So when injectors say, oh, the toxin doesn't spread, it actually does. We see it in studies, especially animal studies, but I think it's the mode of how it happens that's not as clearly understood. Okay, so this study is great too because it actually talks about how there is evidence that shows that the toxin can actually cross the BBB, the blood-brain barrier, and that is extremely significant. And I will go into that in further detail in another video for sure. Okay, moving on. I'm just going to read for you the warning of distant spread of toxin effect from the manufacturer themselves. Post-marketing reports indicate that the effects of Botox and all botulinum toxin products may spread from the area of injection to produce symptoms consistent with botulinum toxin effects, and that just means botulism. Later in the medication guide, it uses the word botulism, but right here it says botulinum toxin effects. These may include asthenia, generalized muscle weakness, diplopia, I guess it's diplopia, correct me if I'm wrong, ptosis, dysphagia, dysphonia, dysuria, urinary incontinence, and breathing difficulties. These symptoms have been reported hours to weeks after injection, and that's really important. This can happen hours to weeks after injection. Swallowing and breathing difficulties can be life-threatening, and there have been reports of death. The risk of symptoms is probably greatest in children treated for spasticity, but symptoms can also occur in adults treated for spasticity and other conditions, particularly in those patients who have an underlying condition that would predispose them to these symptoms. And I'm going to talk about underlying conditions in a minute. In unapproved uses and also in approved indications, cause of spread of effect have been reported at doses comparable to those used to treat cervical dystonia and spasticity, which are typically higher doses, okay, and also at lower doses. So that's really important. Even the manufacturer says themselves, yes, we are seeing spread of effect, spread of neurotoxin, even at low doses. So next, I'm going to focus just a little bit on blepharoptosis, okay, and I'm going to present to you a study that indicates how blepharoptosis, as per the warning label and also in this particular study, is indicative of botulism. And hopefully this is the only adverse effect that the user experiences from toxin spread. And I also want to make a note that in the manufacturer medication guide, this adverse effect, okay, of blepharoptosis, I believe they call it drooping eyelid, it means the exact same thing, is clearly stated as a sign of spread of toxin effects or botulism. And the study is called the Clinical Analysis of 86 Botulism Cases Caused by Cosmetic Injection of Botulinum Toxin. And this is a total of 86 patients had botulism from cosmetic injection, and they were enrolled in this study. All the patients were diagnosed according to their history of cosmetic injections, clinical symptoms and signs, as well as auxiliary examinations. All patients received comprehensive treatments, okay, and they also all received botulinum antitoxin serum injection. Lucky for them, because let me tell you what, getting antitoxin for botulism from even therapeutic, okay, therapeutic and cosmetic doses of botulinum toxin is virtually unheard of. It doesn't happen very often at all. Now, I believe that these patients were able to receive that because of their enrollment in the study. Also to note that these patients had no history of drug or food allergies, and specifically 62, okay, out of the 86, that's a pretty high number, of the subjects experienced blepharoptosis or extreme difficulty with opening their eyes. Okay, and that was from the NCBI, NLM, and I will certainly list that below. Okay, another one, serious and long-term adverse events associated with the therapeutic and cosmetic use of botulinum toxin. And this is a pharmacology study, and there's a lot of review in this one, and it's really good. And the footnotes of this study are awesome because it lists, boom, 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 so many other resources for people. But it talks about the serious adverse events included in this study were dysphagia, respiratory compromise, generalized muscle weakness, bilateral ptosis, okay, pseudoaneurysm of the frontal branch of the temporal artery, and then several other things are listed here. But the one I'm focusing on is how it talks about serious adverse events, okay, indicating botulism with, again, we see ptosis listed there. Okay, and I just am trying to help people make this connection that yes, ptosis is in fact a symptom, okay, an adverse event that is associated with botulism. Okay, and then it talks about that the deaths were attributed to botulism itself or possibly anaphylactic shock. And in conclusion, the study says that botulinum toxin may cause serious adverse events, which are more common after therapeutic use, and we know that, okay, because therapeutic use is typically a lot higher, 100 to 400 units in a single session. Okay, I know that the Allergan trainer said 1,000 units. That's typically, no, we're not seeing numbers like that. It's more like 1 to 400 units. But it says here, it is also noted after cosmetic use as well. So in 2005, and this is kind of part of the review of this particular study, the FDA raised significant safety issues of botulinum toxin in a published analysis of adverse events that covered a time period from 1989 to 2003. And according to that publication, there were 407 adverse reports to the therapeutic use of it. And that was a median dose of only 100 units. And then 217 of those actually did meet the FDA's requirements for their definition of a very serious adverse event. And then there were also 36 reports that were related to cosmetic use. So that is happening, and that was in 2005. And since then, there's been others. I love how the review in this study also discusses how incredibly difficult it is to establish the long-term safety of botulinum toxin. And I know in a earlier IGTV, I go through Dr. Hristova's long-term study, which is an awesome one. So check that out if you haven't. But it's incredibly difficult to establish the long-term safety of botulinum toxin because of the worldwide issue with underreporting. It happens all the time. We have thousands of reports available in the FAERS database, obviously. I think it's like, last we checked, was it 56,000 or just under 60,000? But we can assume that conservatively that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have experienced adverse effects from Botox, and either they've just never connected the dots back to their injections, or they just simply are not reporting for whatever reason. Yes, okay, one thing that I do kind of find to be a little bit ironic about this whole situation with the fashion blogger is that the manufacturer rep spent so much time in this live video trying to ease people's fears about the incidence rate of severe ptosis, stating that the manufacturer says that it's only around a 3% risk and that she believed that to be high. However, that is what the label says. And that also is very similar to other studies that I've read, between a 3 and I've seen some actually as high as 5.4%. But in their label, it says 13 people out of the sample size of 405 experienced severe ptosis. And so it's just interesting to me and kind of ironic that it says this in the warning label, but yet we have thousands of injectors, you know, worldwide that are saying, I have never heard of this before, or I have never seen a case as bad as this fashion blogger's before. And I guess for me, I believe that to either be just like a lie, or that the injector's head is basically just under a rock and they haven't even read the label word for word, the 50-page label for the product. You can go to realself.com yourself, which is a public site that you can see tons of people who have had ptosis as bad as this case or even worse. I stopped counting it at over like 20 cases. And then also in our Facebook group, which is a private group that you can join, you can go to the search bar there and you can type in ptosis and you can see tons and tons and tons of people who have also experienced this as well. So I just want to say that I would hope that after this whole charade, that there wouldn't be an injector anywhere that would say that I've never heard of this before, because clearly it happens. The main takeaway I want folks to have from this is when responding to the statement that it is such a low percentage and it shouldn't happen if the injector knows what they are doing, and that, you know, when you use basically magic fingers and we can assess the strength of the muscle and we can titrate the dose and we can adjust the dose and we can perfectly dilute it, and then when we do all these things to avoid this. And I just want people to see that nothing is absolute. It could happen to you for sure. And also that studies show, and the manufacturer label confirms this, that this toxin all by its little bitty nanoparticle site itself can and has the ability to migrate to areas that are unintended, whether it be the bloodstream or to other adjacent muscles, or even distant areas, just simply because of what it is. It's a very large neurotoxic protein and it has major capabilities. This is just a biologic fact. Moving on. How to screen an injector. Okay, so hold on here, let me scroll back up. How to screen an injector, or how to steer away. I'll say this really nicely. How to steer away from an injector. The first thing that I would do is I would steer away from an injector that uses the super eye roll worthy term neuromodulator, okay, for Botox or for Dysport or any of the others. This is a marketing mover and it's a term to confuse you. It is an accurate term, okay, it is accurate, but it, in this case, seems like it's being used here to sound a lot less threatening than the actual correct terminology, which is neurotoxin or neurotoxic protein. And it's funny to me that we just all of a sudden this neuromodulator this, neuromodulator that, and the general public just doesn't even really know what a neuromodulator is. It just doesn't sound like it's that serious of a thing. Because you want to know what else is a neuromodulator? Is cannabinoids. So I don't think that I need to say very much more about that. Botulinum toxin, however, is by definition the world's most lethal neurotoxic protein, and it does a lot more, okay, than soften and relax muscle. Yes, it does that, okay, definitely does that. but it is also a nerve destroyer. Okay, it actually destroys the nerve. Okay, and movement is restored to the muscle once your body goes through a regenerative process to grow new nerves that are capable of functioning properly. And so any injector that downplays the power of this protein should not be trusted with your face. Number 2, look for an injector that will sit down with you in a consultation and present to you the 50-page warning label for the product and discuss in depth with you any contraindications to make sure that you don't have any of them. Obviously, you guys know that I believe there is no safe botulinum injections, but I understand that no matter how much information people are armed with, and no matter how much research they do themselves, that there is going to be a huge percentage of people that will still use botulinum toxin injections. And so I want to make sure that I'm putting out the information to those people who should never use this product because it is contraindicated and the likelihood of them experiencing severe illness is very high. And I think that this is information that people were wanting in that live video, but they just simply didn't get it. So this is all via the warning label of the product. Anyone that has a cardiovascular disease, a heart arrhythmia, or a myocardial infarction, so cardiovascular things, it would be wise, now these are my words, to extend this for any cardiovascular issue, SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, prolapses, and then the list goes on and on and on. Okay, heart murmurs, those kinds of things. If you have any cardiovascular issue whatsoever, not a candidate for botulinum toxin. Second, individuals with peripheral motor neuropathic diseases. Okay, this is like ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Also, neuromuscular junction disorders. Okay, these are patients that have the myasthenia gravis disease or also Lambert-Eaton syndrome. They need to be especially careful. And then also patients with neuromuscular disorders. And so these are people who have the autoimmune dysfunctions, okay? And there's a huge long list of these, obviously. These can include anything like Sjögren's syndrome, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, chronic inflammatory conditions that affect the myelin, like MS. It would be, and these are my words, very wise to extend this, okay, this warning for any persons with any autoimmune disorders or even family histories of such, because there are studies that are showing the link between botulinum toxin injections and the development of autoimmune issues. Now, autoimmune things are indicative on diagnostic tests, and so that is really important. I will do, hopefully in the future, as more information is available. I have a little bit, I have a good amount, but I want more. As that comes out, I will be sure to update you guys. But I would say that this is definitely something that we have seen in our group. This is what happened to my sister, okay, with the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. After she had Botox injections, that's what happened to her. And then there are just hundreds of people in our larger group that have now developed autoimmune diseases or disorders from having their toxin injections. Moving on. Anybody that has dysphagia or breathing difficulties of any kind, treatment with Botox and other botulinum toxin products can result in swallowing or breathing difficulties. So these are patients that have pre-existing swallowing or breathing difficulties, that they are very susceptible to complications. And in most cases, this is a consequence of weakening of the muscles in the area of injection that are involved in breathing and swallowing. And so deaths have definitely occurred from this, from severe dysphagia. People are unable to breathe after treatment with botulinum toxin. I would extend that to people who have breathing difficulties for other issues too, like I would think about allergies and asthma, or if you have like a lung issue. I know there's what's the one? Alpha something. There's a number of them, but if you have breathing difficulties, you definitely need to talk that over with your doctor extensively. Okay, pre-existing conditions at the injection site. Caution should be used when Botox cosmetic treatment is used in the presence of inflammation at the proposed injection sites. If you have ptosis or if you have excessive weakness or atrophy present in any of those targeted muscles. Now that one is a really interesting contraindication for me, because we know that repeated use of botulinum toxin injections eventually weaken the muscle and cause muscle atrophy. And so it's just, and even the injector in the live video even said that in most cases, this is what patients want, is they want the muscles to atrophy. But the more that you use it, it now becomes a risk, as per the warning label, that it's contraindicated for that use now. And so that's really just something to think about. I know that studies have shown that severe muscle atrophy, or muscles that are atrophied, have a really hard time holding on to that toxin. And it's oftentimes seen in these people who experience, the toxin seeping or migrating out of the muscle, because it just simply can't sit there. The muscle can't hold on to it. And so this could be one reason why, one explanation for why sometimes people don't experience toxin spread right away on their first, fourth, fifth, 10th time even. And then they all of a sudden, on time 11, let's say, they experience severe toxin spread. And it could simply be because that muscle was so atrophied that it couldn't hold the toxin. Okay, something to think about. There have been reports of dry eye associated with Botox Cosmetic near the oculi muscle. If symptoms of dry eye or even irritation or photophobia or vision changes happen, that they should go see an ophthalmologist. Or if you are a person that has these things frequently, or even maybe from allergies, that you may want to consider skipping Botox. Let me tell you, the folks who have experienced severe dry eye from this product they're miserable. It's horrible to have that. Okay, now I'm going to go and there's a couple others, you guys, that I'll let you read through, but I wanted to touch on the key ones and let you do the rest with, so I don't make this video just way too long. But to give you now the bulleted point list from the medication guide, if you've had an allergic reaction to any other botulinum toxin product, you're not a candidate. If you have a skin infection, if you've had a facial surgery, or if you have been treated for urinary incontinence, or you have a UTI, you're not a candidate. Okay, there's some serious UTI things that can happen with distant toxin spread that will inhibit people's ability to even urinate properly. And so if you already have these issues, it's especially important for you not to use Botox. These are all things that you should tell your doctor before receiving Botox Cosmetic. And if you have any other medical conditions that affects your muscles or nerves, and we talked about the specific illnesses. And then let me just scroll down here. Any past breathing issues or breathing problems, or even swallowing problems. If you have a bleeding disorder, like let's say you have von Willebrand's, which is a clotting disorder. If you cut yourself, you could, overbleed, or any forms of hemophilia. If you have any plans to have surgery on your face, or you've had any past surgeries, if you have weakness in your forehead muscles, or even trouble raising your eyebrows, if you already have ptosis or drooping eyelids, or if you have any change in the way that your face normally looks, those are things that you would definitely need to discuss with your doctor. You may not be a candidate for these injections. And then also, of course, if you're pregnant or plan to become pregnant, or if you're breastfeeding or planning to breastfeed, it is just simply not known exactly, the risks involved there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. Okay. So please be sure that you list all of your medications with your doctor, and you yourself go to I think it's drugs.com, WebMD, there's a few of them that list all the contraindicated drugs that you may be taking that have serious interactions listed with botulinum toxin. There's 24 serious ones listed, and then there's 88 moderate ones. So if you're taking any of the 112 listed contraindicated drugs, you're not a candidate for Botox. Okay, and then moving on. Steer away from any injector that advertises or downplays off-label use. Just because injectors have the power of the pen does not mean that it's justifiable to use off-label use or that it's ethical. This was always Botox's marketing plan from the very get-go. They narrowly approved Botox for very specific uses, and then they have aggressively marketed it for basically everything, as we know now, and even depression. Okay, well, it's for everything now, but it is actually illegal to market it in that way. And it's not justifiable. In fact, no employee of the company is supposed to be endorsing off-label use of Botox, and yet it's rampant in sales and trainings, and it's obviously rampant all over Instagram and even in the live video that we watched. And it's just simply, it's unethical, and it could get the injector into hot water, and I think that it should, because I learned every time Botox is even used in an off-label way, that it's supposed to be reported. And I don't think that we're even sure that that's happening. Okay, yes, Allergan has paid millions of dollars in criminal fines for illegally marketing off-label use. It would just basically be in your best interest to steer away from any injector who believes that they have the power to inject anywhere and wherever they want. And that's going against FDA approvals for the product. And I will make a note that even injecting more units than that is approved for specific areas is also considered off-label use. And if you look in the labels, it lists the 3 specific areas, you know, up on the forehead area, the glabellar, the lateral canthal lines, and then the forehead lines. And there are very specific amounts of units, like 20 units, 24 units. And we all know like people getting 50, 60, 70 all at one time. So the fact that the manufacturer on the live video uses 100 units all over her face is every few months is hugely concerning. And that's something that I commented, and I think that's about when they kicked me off or so, but it's hugely concerning. And I hope that she's okay. I really do in the future if she's not already experiencing symptoms. Also, the fact that this particular injector uses what she calls macro doses for women who plan to not get Botox for a very lengthy period of time, like 9 to 12 months, whether they're pregnant or going to become pregnant or trying to get pregnant. So she's giving them these macro doses so that their Botox can last an extremely long time. It's hugely unethical. It's absolutely dangerous, and I'm shocked that those words were even spoken. So just to read it directly from the label for you, serious adverse reactions with unapproved use include excessive weakness, dysphagia, aspiration, pneumonia, with some adverse reactions associated with fatal outcomes have been reported in patients who received Botox injections for unapproved uses. And then it goes on and on and on. It says it right there in the warning label that unapproved uses are extremely dangerous. And that's why I say it's unethical. Okay, moving on. Run away from any injector that tells you not to Google, that you will read scary things that are misinformation. You guys, you should Google, because a lot of your Googling will lead you to the studies that you need to read that will give you the real information that needs to be understood in those studies. Medical studies be scary to read. Yeah, I'll give her that. But it's not misinformation. It's real information, and that's information that should be in the hands of the people. So yeah, I would steer away from any trainer, injector, manufacturer, rep that would steer you to not do that, and basically just sweep the real information under the rug. And I don't think I need to say anything more about that. Also steer away from any injector that says that, I love this one, that accessory proteins play a role in the product in any way, whether it makes it cleaner or safer or more pure or whatever it is that they say. Anything with the accessory proteins, just dismiss that. It's just a bunch of marketing techniques to get you to think that the product is somehow better or safer. And I'm going to direct an entire IGTV video just to this whole Xeomin, marketing stunt of 2020, because it's basically anyone that has the ability to interpret studies and critically think about information will see that the whole thing is laughable. It's ridiculous. All right, moving on again. Steer away from any injector that would downplay the risks of botulinum for pregnant or breastfeeding mothers, and also make a joke that they personally know injectors who will do it. I could spend so much time on this, but I'll just direct you to read the information I put up in a blog post I wrote about botulinum during pregnancy and breastfeeding. This whole portion of this live video, you guys, it's so inappropriate on so many levels that it was really hard for me to watch. And so I hope that after you do some more investigating, that listening to the comments that were made, that will cause to give you pause, like a serious pause, because anybody that would joke or say that it can be used during pregnancy and know people that have, or breastfeeding, it's extremely unethical here. And seriously, if that doesn't cause people to pause, I'm starting to worry that there's no hope, really. Anyway, animal studies have determined fetal harm, defect, or loss. Also similar findings in humans, and this is obviously from Allergan's studies themselves, that does conclude that abnormal pregnancy outcomes in mothers exposed to botulinum during pregnancy, okay, we saw some abnormal outcomes. We saw fetal defects, loss, and harm to the fetus, but they conclude that it's similar findings to what we would see in the background rates of the general population. And so that is, reading that information is where you're going to have to really use your own discernment to decide if you're going to trust the manufacturer on that or if you're going to trust your gut instinct. And I don't know about you, but for me, knowing and understanding the true history of Botox, the criminal findings against them over the last 20 years, and also the hot water that they are in for the textured implants and the class action lawsuits that are going on with that when they knew that those implants were extremely dangerous, that leads me to think that no way am I going to believe what they say about, the safety of it, for pregnant women being, being a similar conclusion to what you would see in a general population. But that's just me. I'll let you decide that for yourself. Also, I would steer away from injectors that downplay the risk of Botox on fertility and make absolute statements such as Botox has zero effect on fertility. Because there we go again with a statement that is absolute and for me completely reduces the credibility of the person saying it, because it is obvious that this person has not read the studies. They don't understand or haven't read about the importance of choline to fertility and the developing fetus. And really, I don't believe that they even understand the importance of acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, okay, that is extremely crucial in neurological health. I don't think that they understand that. So that for me is a huge red flag. That's something that you can decide for yourself if that's a red flag or not. Also, I would steer away from injectors who don't understand how Botox is measured. I love this one, and most importantly, why it doesn't show up in the bloodstream. Okay, this is a great one, you guys. And I still can't believe the misinformation in this live video coming from a trainer themselves. For the record, botulinum from Botox injections can't show up in the blood. That does not mean that it is not there. The reason why it can't is because of the dosing itself. It's done in a nanogram. Okay, a nanogram is 1/1,000,000th of 1 milligram. This is an extremely tiny amount. Okay, it's teeny. 1 gram of botulinum toxin can literally wipe out 1,000,000 people. 1,000,000. 1 milligram of botulinum toxin injected into anybody's body would kill them basically instantly. Okay, and it would kill even more people than that. So these little nanograms, okay, are undetectable in the blood simply because the particle, it's so small, it's such a teeny amount. There is one study that can detect it in the blood. This is called a mouse assay test, but it's only available in Germany or Poland. So if you're in those areas, lucky for you, you can request that test. But that will show it. However, that blood test has to be drawn within, just a day or two of having the toxin injections. And then there's also a Vega test, which botulism from cosmetic injections can be shown on. However, it's just not really recognized by Western doctors, and so it's not one that you're going to really be able to get. There are other testing that can be done through skin biopsies, small fiber neuropathy biopsies, but those are really only done by the very few doctors that actually understand the mechanisms of botulism from Botox injections. So lucky for manufacturers. This is my snarky statement for the day. They officially have the perfect crime because you can give all these people these injections and then you cannot see it on a diagnostic test. So it is only being diagnosed by the symptoms or the adverse events themselves. So that's basically it. I hope that this video was helpful for you. I hope that it gave people who are considering using toxin injections a little bit more information to go off of whether or not they should use them, if there's anything in there, for them that would be contraindicated. You know how I feel. I don't think there's any safe use for botulinum, and that I wish that people wouldn't use it, but that's my opinion, and I will let you guys form your own opinion. As always, if you have any questions or comments, write them down below or reach out to me. Hope you guys have a good evening. Thank you so much for watching. Talk to you soon.